This week, John Loucaides from Eclipsium is with us to discuss PK fail, or I lost my keys. Normally not a big deal unless you're a BIOS manufacturer. Then in the security news, hacking traffic lights, for real this time. The Docker API strikes again. Access GitHub deleted data, using EDR to elevate privileges on Windows. Computers I need in my life. Failed experiments in Raspberry Pi access points. Sitting ducks in Tutor. It's always DNS times 2. Null sessions and a blast from the past. Chaining UEFI vulnerabilities. Pirates exposed. Revoking SSL certificates. And using AI to analyze your brain. Multimodal automated interpretability agent. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. It's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Quick question. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question. Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1Password. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 837, being recorded on Wednesday, July 31st, 2024. I am here with my friends, Mr. Bill Swearingen. How are you, Bill?
Hey, Paul, I'm doing great. I have not prepared for next week yet, so I'm doing this instead, right?
Right. That's, as you should. I mean, you could be building fences. Josh Morbitt is here with us. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, pleasure, as always. I've got my exploding chickens in the background. Don't mind them.
That's, it's very artful. It's art. Yes, it's very nice. Quick announcement before we dig into it. You're invited to InfoSec World 2024 at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in Lake Buena Vista, Florida from September 23rd through the 25th. Join top cybersecurity experts for this premier event. Save 25% on your pass by using the code ISW24-SW25 when you register at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2024. Don't miss out on this exclusive opportunity. Today, we are joined by Mr. John Loucaides, Senior VP of Strategy from the company that I work for and he works for. We both work for Eclipsium. John, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Good to see you again.
Dude, it's good to have you on here. I've been dying to dig into this issue on the air, and I thought this was a good opportunity to bring one of my coworkers on to talk about it. So this one's kind of, really exciting for me. Well, I mean, it's exciting for us, but it creates a problem in our industry, specifically with secure boot. And we learned, I believe late last week, that a platform key has been leaked, is essentially it. And John, I love the way you explain this, mostly because I have to ask you to explain things more than once to me at work. And so, John, what is the platform key and why is this a problem in the context of secure boot?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a dumpster fire. The whole secure boot ecosystem has been riddled with trouble for a long time. I think we've talked about it before on air. I think we've talked about it a whole lot more off air. The platform key is the root, the key at the top of the hierarchy for all of the UEFI secure boot protection. So you have a platform key, and then it is responsible for enrolling or allowing change to a key exchange key. This is usually where Microsoft's third-party CA lives. And then you get the actual allow and deny lists that basically tell you whether or not you can run a bootloader. And so if you're going to
preserve the root of trust, those lists have to be signed, both the allow list and the deny list.
Yes. So every change to any of the things that I was just talking about has to be signed for it to take effect.
And it's a hierarchy. Those that have watched John or I's presentations, we delve into the inner workings of Secure Boot. Actually, in quite a few different talks, we cover it in varying degrees. I liked the official definition for a platform key is to establish trust between the platform owner and the platform firmware. And in this, like, where are the roles, right? Because who's the platform owner? In this case, is it like a Dell, HP, Lenovo is the platform owner, or the platform owner is not really AMI or Phoenix or Inside, or is it?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question that we could probably spend the whole time
Mm,
debating. In general, the platform owner would usually be expected to be the end user, but in reality is the one who actually created the thing that you sold. Usually that would mean the OEM.
right.
So
Okay.
it's
That's how
it's
I
going to
thought.
be
Yeah.
the yeah.
If
And so usually when you're looking at the platform key, whose key is it? It's probably the key of the people who have the logo on the box. Now, what we have in this case is a test key, right? And anyone who does development is going to end up needing some kind of a test apparatus, some sort of a test harness. And especially when it comes to like secure boot and signing things that are going to run, it makes sense that you're going to need to test that. I mean,
I
I
see.
hope
So
they're
I'm
testing it.
developing software, right? That's part of the boot process
Yeah.
in Secure Boot. I'm gonna need to test that. So
And
hmm,
I sure hope they do, which is,
mhm.
it's a good thing to have a test key.
Otherwise, your system's not gonna boot potentially.
Right. You just
Mhm.
don't really want that test key to be the thing that everybody has in production, when they're buying stuff and running things that they might want to maybe secure. Be
Right.
be nice if it was
Yeah.
actually.
Now you can create your own key. Like if you run an Arch Linux based distribution or um, several other Linux distributions as an example, maybe even BSD, because BSD doesn't participate in shim, right? Certain operating systems won't participate in the secure boot, and their documentation is you have to go create your own root of trust, right? Which means you can do this. You can go into your BIOS and you can reset everything and go wipe away whatever keys are there, PKCAC and all that stuff, and generate all your own things. And it's a lot of work and it's very tedious. I often don't recommend it because then it
You
leaves a
tried it.
yeah, I've been
One
down
of
this
the
path.
few.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't want this level of responsibility on my system, basically, right? Because that means anytime software that is in secure boot is changed, I have to make sure I update my keys or my
Have to
DBXs and
sign
DBs. I have
something.
to sign stuff, and I'm
Yeah.
just lazy, and I don't want to do that.
There's that
Basically,
and the the feature in the spec calls this custom mode,
hmm
where you sort of have your built-in stuff and there should be a way to restore that, but you should be able to take control of it too. One of the big pains, in my opinion, about all of that is it kind of depends on which BIOS you have, how to do it, and all the
correct.
specifics of. In many ways, you have a really nice standard with UEFI, and UEFI gives you things that standardized what used to be all over the map. Um, but now you're sort of finding all these little things that you're like, man, I really wish they standard that.
Yes,
If they would
yes,
want maybe have made this easy, I would
right.
actually use it, but no way.
It's interesting too when we talk about test keys as folks that have like looked at the certificates on our systems, right? And our software platform does that analysis as well, but manually going and just start looking at things. And I think I was talking about with Jesse Michael, one of our other coworkers. I was like, Jesse, someone's on a forum asking about they were looking at their PK key and it said like do not trust or do not trust test key. And I was like, dude, what is that? That doesn't sound good. Like it doesn't sound like it should be there. Because if the top hierarchy in the root of trust is a key whose description says do not trust, I'm like, isn't this is like a problem, right?
No, this really works the same way as in your web browser, right? You have a
Yeah,
hierarchy
right.
of a root CA, right, and then you have a subordinate like intermediate CA, and then
Mhm.
you can have individual certificates for different things. this is exactly the same thing. And it's imagine if you went into your web browser's, certificates of root CAs, and you saw right up at the top in all caps, "Do not trust." I don't
Hmm.
know. That's kind
Might
of
be a
what you
problem.
saw there.
Right.
That's
But
the
my assessment,
experience.
and I even think Jesse and I verbalized this or we're typing it on Slack, and like it basically come down to I'm like, wait, this is only a problem if the private key were to leak. Like it's fine if there's a test key and someone controls the private key very closely, it's preserving the root of trust. And then I read this article last week and I'm like, holy crap, like the nightmare scenario that I envisioned, like literally have nightmares about, is someone loses a key that's important to these roots of trust. This one happens to be secure boot. I'm like, they lost the private key.
Come on, man. Who would ever lose a private key?
Well, that's my point.
Who would ever lose a private key? You lock those things up.
It
Did
happened.
I just drop that key right down? Oh,
Yeah,
here,
right.
let me go get it
Yeah.
for you.
Okay, that was good, John. That was good.
It happens. We saw this with the leaked boot card key. I think we saw this in a case with MSI. Certain MSI keys have been leaked. So this is not a
Can
new
we back up a little bit, Paul? So
Yeah.
you two are like really close to this. Like how did the key? How did it get lost? Like so, I don't really know that part of the story.
Yeah. So someone put it in a GitHub repo is the short answer.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like every other
Right.
key in
Right.
this dumpster fire of a world.
Got it. Okay.
So I was analyzing the GitHub repo. I actually, because it says in the Ars Technica article, it links to the GitHub repo and it says this private key was in this GitHub repo, which has been wiped off the face of the planet for the most part. Except if you go back in the Internet Wayback Machine, there's one entry from May of 2023 where you can see the
Wow.
GitHub page. And it looks to me, John, correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like the reference code, like EDK2 repository was cloned.
Yeah,
Like
it
it's a
looks like
UEFI
some.
development kit, basically, is what the folders and files kind of map to. Except in this snapshot from May 2023, there is a folder named keys. And in similar repos where people have, UEFI software development kits with all the same kind of files name, there's no folder named keys. And I'm like, well, and I'm clicking on it. I'm like, is the key in there? And it's like, oh, Wayback Machine didn't
on.
archive that page. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Or maybe somebody deleted that one. But
Correct. Or someone has been wiping because that repo
Yeah.
had been forked. It had been cloned. There's
Yep.
like stuff.
Well,
out
the
there
good
that's
news
been
is
wiped
if
away.
it's been wiped, then at least it's removed from the internet, right? Like it's gone.
right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
And we didn't hear anything about how deleted GitHub repositories might still have the data or anything
Right.
like that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
good
the
thing.
Don't bury the
started
lead.
going
Don't
down.
bury the lead. Yeah.
You got
So
it.
I did read the recent research on recovering stuff from GitHub, and I don't have enough yet to go like someone could go recover that key.
You
I tried.
need to find somebody who forked it.
Correct.
Oh, God.
Correct. And the list of who forked it isn't available in the Wayback
Yeah.
Machine. So
Yeah.
there's some real interesting kind of open source intelligence gathering you'd need to do from this point forward.
Yeah. So if you forked it, make it private right now and try and sell it to somebody. Do you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, I mean, that's probably happening right now, Bill.
Yeah.
I mean, because that repo, I mean, you just all you had to do is clone that repo. If you cloned that repo before it was taken down, you are the proud owner of the private key that's
Yep.
used by now 850 different
Wow.
model machines.
Wow.
Right. And that number keeps growing as we
And it's
discover.
tough. Like you'd have to. So when we went through some of the other leaks in the past, so MSI got breached and they leaked a bunch of actually very similar. It's whole source tree to all of this firmware. And as we were kind of looking through that, you really do have to be careful that what you see isn't always what you think it is. So we actually had to test, does that private key actually correspond to this actual public key that's in all these systems? And we were able to test.
Turns out
this,
that like math is
sometimes
super useful in this case because you can
Math
totally
is useful.
do that. Right. Math is math.
There's a
Basically
reason we
gets
went
you
to
there.
school.
Right.
For all the elementary and junior high school teachers teaching math out there, that this is why this is why you needed to learn that. But it turns out it's easy to have multiple test keys, especially when you have forks owned by different companies and different development teams all over the place, maybe even with the same name.
Hmm.
And shockingly, you might even write "do not trust." Like,
Mhm.
this is actually reasonable stuff you might do, and it might not actually be the thing in your machine. So you got to actually test the key and see if it actually decrypts or
Right.
signs.
And this was like a staggering like moment for me in understanding why we're in the place we are. Bill, to kind of like your question of like, how do we? Where does the key come from? Why is this happening? This open ecosystem that we have with Intel, Microsoft, or
Mhm.
Linux, and
Mhm.
the BIOS providers, right? AMI Phoenix inside, HP, Lenovo, Dell, and others on the OEM side all have to work together if they're going to provide a trusted platform, right? So given they have to work together, that means developers have to share code and share
Mhm.
things, and there's like a supply chain that it all gets put together. But we have to be open about it because Intel, right, and Microsoft and all the others want an open platform so that anyone can take an Intel chip and go build a system and have a trusted platform. But that openness, which is I hate this part of the openness and freedom, right? That openness and freedom also is a detriment in certain cases, such as security.
Yeah. So just to keep going with that, John. So we understand it's it sounds like it's a bad thing. Like, what's the worst that could happen, right? So like let's talk about what is the
Great
bad
question.
news here.
So this is actually um, kind of a difficult choice for me right now. You've asked just the right question, and I can definitely argue this to be either amazingly terrible or literally nothing.
Hmm.
Like, it doesn't matter. And I absolutely can make both arguments. It's kind of funny.
No, this I
Um,
want to hear. Go for it. Go
yeah,
for it.
right.
Mhm.
On one hand, this is the thing that is telling the bootloader it is okay to run, right? It's the thing that allows the bootloader to run or not.
Hmm.
And so, why do you do that? Um, if you were trying
So
to undermine every possible OS security thing you could do, every possible security software you might be running in addition to that, one way to do that is a bootkit. And a bootkit would run before the operating system, change the initial state either as the operating system's loading or before it loads. And you've just undermined everything. There's very little you can do about it once you've just been had like that. And operating systems over the years have gotten a lot better at making this difficult, or, at least more steps.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, and so has the boot process itself. And one of those things is secure boot. That's what this allows you to do. And by the way, it's not just like my machine where that'll work. It's a lot of these machines that all have this key embedded.
Hmm.
Okay, so that sounds terrible. One of the things we've been doing over the last like 5 years is just blowing huge holes through that entire security mechanism.
Mhm.
And this is like one more.
Hmm.
And there's so many other similar problems that um, it's just really hard to believe you're going to get a lot of security in the signature on the bootloader anymore. And that's because it's a certificate process. So anytime you have signed code, you have these same problems over and over and over. We've done it all sorts of times, right? So you regret signing something at some point because either it was malicious or it was vulnerable and you just said it's cool. And so now you can bypass all of the whatever you were trying to do with that signature because now it runs arbitrary code. Yeah, there's a lot of those.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it gets worse because the usual solution is that you'll add it to a revocation list,
Right.
right? You'll
Hmm.
update and say, all right, I'm signing something that says, don't do this. Don't let this one. Funny thing, when was the last time you updated a revocation list in your BIOS?
Right. I didn't even
That's
know
the
if I
problem.
didn't even know if that existed. Right. So that was actually where I was going to take.
Exactly.
I don't even know if that even exists. right?
I mean,
It
but
does.
the good news is in a lot of cases with Windows, does that get updated for you? Does
Not on
Microsoft?
Windows.
Not in Windows,
Hmm.
right? No.
No,
What?
actually, there's some funny stories about this. Actually, Microsoft a couple of times tried to do this and push it via Windows Update. They actually stopped twice.
Wait. Paul, I have a problem with this guest. Okay. My problem is very simple. I'm not sure whether I need to have a very large drink and be laying on a therapist couch or be having a beer and going, no shit, there I was. Okay.
Yeah, I'm having the beer and say, no shit, there we were, Josh.
So, like, okay, I'm sorry, John. Go ahead. Okay.
No,
So Windows
no.
has tried to do.
I'm good either way. You pick
Oh,
either one of those. That probably either one's appropriate.
okay, so Microsoft has tried to do revocation lists on Windows at various times and is failing to do so miserably.
Well, you can apply it manually, but what I'm saying is automatically pushing it
Yeah.
out as Windows Update. It's not pushing out the updating the DB and the DBX, right?
It's not, and the reason it's not has nothing to do with like inability to do it. They absolutely could.
Oh, absolutely.
They did do it. They tried it, and then they had some machines fail to boot afterward. Not their
They
fault. Not their
CrowdStriked?
bug.
Yes, CrowdStrikes. Very.
Worse because it literally is a brick now.
Wow.
Oh, it's
And
a full
so,
brick.
yeah, they actually bricked machines. Now, why?
Oh, they actually bricked machines.
Yeah.
That?
This is if you can find this because it's the actual same bug. You can find this in your Linux kernel archive stuff. If you go back to when, do you remember? I forgot what they called it, but it was like kdump, where it was going to say I'm going to save crash information into a UEFI variable. And they broke the Samsungs, right? Like there were certain Samsungs that just bricked when you did this. Same problem. See what you're doing when you're updating DBX. It's a revocation list, so it grows. And especially when you look at a whole hierarchy of different things that got signed, and you revoke something, you find out that actually I might have to revoke a whole ton of things. So it gets really funny. We experienced this when we published Boothole, which was a vulnerability in Grub. And you can think about how many different versions of Grub there are, all of which had to be revoked.
Entrust
It was awesome.
is going to totally fuck the system when they get pulled out by Chrome, by Google in a few months, right? This is going to. Do you know what
Which
I'm talking
one?
about?
Maybe not.
Is it Entrust? Entrust is about to be delisted.
Oh yeah, that's different. That's different because it's a different set of root CAs. The
Okay,
browser
valid.
keeps
Good
its own
point.
set.
Good point. But
Similar concept though, because that's going to like screw everybody, right? So this is a similar problem where once you have so many, you can't fit it into the BIOS flash. There's too many. So what you start doing, you actually back up the hierarchy up the chain. You don't revoke each of those little things. You revoke the intermediate CA, right? You revoke this thing that signs other things. And so then you go completely nuts.
640K is enough for anybody. What's wrong with you?
Well, I think it's 32K is the length
I know,
of the variable.
but it reminded me of the
DBX.
joke.
Yeah.
Okay, come on.
It sounds about right. Yes.
Yeah. But the
So-
spy flashes are mostly, how much space is on an average spy flash chip in your standard PC today?
I would guess somewhere around 32 megs.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can definitely get 128 on a server or something like that. There are some machines that have multiple, right? They can do that for redundancy, but they can also do that just to increase the storage. There's all sorts of stuff people do, but that actually, the fact that there's so much stuff people do, is where Microsoft ran into trouble. It's that there's so many different things out there, so many different implementations, and it only takes one to actually brick when you do one of these things. For you, if you're Microsoft, to be like, "Oh, come on."
You're right though. They're avoiding the CrowdStrike because I'm best case if something gets pushed to your revocation list, right, and revokes a piece of software via secure boot that you need to boot, it's going to stop. As long as you can access your BIOS settings and you have physical access to the machine, you can go and you can disable secure boot and boot normally, fix the problem, and it's fine.
Yep.
The situations where it can cause problems is you've set a BIOS password and you forgot what that was. Now
That'll
you're
be
in trouble.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
Or if it
Or
doesn't make it that far.
yeah, or right. Or now
Whoops.
you're talking some other problem where it
That's
doesn't
bad.
boot. There's no like except for like servers largely going back or having like a snapshot of your previous like spy flash is usually not. I mean, in some
Not a
cases it
thing.
is.
I mean, it's possible.
It's possible. But like servers sometimes have like a way to do that because the
It
server
depends on the
right.
one,
It
right?
depends on
Like
the one. Most PCs though,
most PCs, not so much. Some
unless you've
PCs
taken a
do.
backup, like unless you've taken like a physically clipped onto the chip, taken a
If you know
backup.
how to do that, then you can solve your own problems.
Correct.
I
If you can get the original spy flash dump and all the components, you got to be able to get that. I've seen some shady posts on the internet like you should put this on your spy flash. I'm like, really? How do I know you haven't backdoored my spy flash?
I have also sent you similar message, I think, but never mind. It was under a different handle.
I'm just still kind of smiling at the process, Paul, of going into your BIOS and disabling safe boot, and then you're kind of just like fixed it.
That's it. Yeah, then Then I'm done. Then I'm like, you know what? That caused a problem. So
There,
I'm
I
never
fixed it.
enabling that ever again. So my system boots. You're totally on point.
Isn't that what the guidance was for SE Linux for a while there?
Yep. There's a lot of
Just
things.
turn it off.
Right. I mean, hopefully people don't do that with CrowdStrike. I mean, actually,
Oh,
CrowdStrike is a
yeah.
decent product and does prevent
Mm-hmm.
a lot of bad things from happening. Right.
I
So,
mean,
yeah.
have you ever done a STIG? A STIG is a great way to
Oh,
make a machine not work, but it is
yes,
damn
it is.
Correct.
secure when you're done.
Right. So I want to go back to the test key for a moment because the test keys have been around for a long time. In fact, there was a CVE in 2016
Hmm.
where they called out like a vulnerability and pointed at this test key. But I was always like, but as long as the private key is secure, then we're probably good, right?
I mean, I think that's correct from a technical perspective, but no one actually expects you to keep a test key secure. So even if you do, like, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are some BIOS development teams and organizations that actually go really hardcore with their test key, but no one expects it, and it literally says "do not trust" on it.
Mm.
If you're going hardcore on this is probably not the most important thing that you're doing. There's probably
Right.
something else you should probably put the energy into. But the real problem is the perception and the expectation, right? You set the expectation that we're not going to secure this thing. Even if you do, why should anyone believe you? Because you put "do not trust" in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, and Bill, to go back to your earlier question too, there's some great videos on there that like explainers as to how this works. Because if you've got the PK and the private portion of the platform key, you can then create a key exchange key, which is like the next set of hierarchies of keys.
It's like an intermediate.
Yep, and insert that into it's actually a UEFI variable. I insert it into there. Now my system trusts code that's signed by
Anything
that key
signed by
exchange.
this.
Anything. So now I create a malicious program that executes somewhere in UEFI, and I've got some options there, and I sign it with my key exchange key, and I put it on the EFI partition as an example, and then I boot the system, and the system goes, "Oh, I trust that code. Totally fine." Now I'm executing code potentially before the bootloader, and definitely before the operating system.
Well, I think what's going to be unfortunate is, and John, I heard your point earlier, right? So I heard you here, but what's going to be real unfortunate is that, if this starts to be leveraged by these ransomware groups, or, just putting it in that, they just drop that into their code base or whatever. And now, we, we truly do need to throw away every, essentially throw away every impacted machine that could start that disaster situation, right?
Yeah, that's the real. You hit on the real disaster scenario.
You
If
really
my
did.
goal
That's
is to
true.
just wipe out a system,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll go back to our previous conversation about the spy flash.
Mm-hmm.
I just start with those elevated privileges, right? Because the executing code in UEFI gives you not just persistence and maybe stealth, right? But it also gives you a really high privilege on the system.
Yeah.
If I can wipe the spy flash, well, I can put a hurting on a whole bunch of
Yeah, for
users,
sure.
right?
For sure. Yeah.
Not a lot of people are quite like you, Paul, where you got your clip and you take
Right.
a extracted image through a hardware programmer of
Right.
Yeah.
before everything goes wrong.
Before everything goes wrong.
He does it to
This
his
is like
TVs, right? He's got the,
right.
he's backed up the
Standard operating
TVs
practice.
and
Take a
stuff.
snapshot of your spy flash as soon as you get
Yeah.
anything new.
I mean, it'd be a great idea, but
But a lot of times you have to go to hardware to do that.
Mhm.
you
And
really
it's-
do.
And you
You
need
really do.
special, I mean, air quotes, special hardware, but
It's special.
special, but also like some patience in
Mostly
stuff.
that.
Because like, it usually doesn't work the first time.
And maybe 2 or 3 of the thing that you're trying to mess with that you maybe broke the first one.
Right.
If you're me in particular.
So just looking, it looks like there's a tool that has been released for you to be able to check firmware images for the existence of this key. Is that have you guys messed with that at all?
hmm
And-
Yeah, it's doing more or less the
Messed
same.
with that.
Messed with. I mean, we could say I've
been
messed with a
screwing
lot
with
of
it, man.
things,
Mhm.
quite a lot. But yeah, this particular thing is actually pretty straightforward. You're just looking for that key inside the blob.
Mhm.
The folks that did that and Eclipsium and honestly a couple of others who sort of publish a lot in this sort of space. You can probably do a lot more than just finding this. Because once you've invested the effort into parsing all of these things that get compressed and put in certain ways, you can do all sorts of stuff. But in particular, this is not a bad idea to go try and just see, is this in there?
Right. Like
It's a simple question.
LVFS will look at your keys and look for the do not trust like as a string,
Mhm.
as and then like there's other ways you have a hash of all the keys that were generated with the PK that was compromised. So you match your keys against a hash. That's another way. But like the
Mhm.
stuff we're talking about and have implemented in the product does like a lot more in terms of detection. Like, well, how can
Sure.
we like
Sure.
when I talked about the things an attacker would do, there's a lot of ways you can detect that capability in that attack path today.
There's a couple of other open source tools as well that can sort of parse these images and show you what's inside these key hierarchies. I know one that I used to work on and the team at Intel still maintains is called ChipSec. And there's another one that actually is really nice from a GUI perspective, right? Like you're not just like in the command line going through all this stuff. It's called UEFI tool, and it'll give you a nice little graphical representation of these things. It's pretty cool.
Now, but are you still reading you have to have downloaded the firmware or whatever or to be able
You
to
need to
read that
get
file?
you need to get an image somehow. Now you can do that by running code.
Well, with the keys though, can I can dump the keys without dumping the spy flash bill.
You can.
Because from the operating system perspective, it has to at least be able to read the keys, right?
So that's where there are a lot of other tools around. Like in Linux, you can actually go and grab the keys out of, I think it's a
EFI var
EFI
EFI var
RFS
will
or
read
whatever,
your
wherever they mount
UEFI
that
variables,
sys
Mhm.
firmware something.
Mhm.
But yes, and you can get the raw data out of that and then parse it. There's a couple of ways, and the nice thing is these are standard interfaces. They're actually documented and in a spec, so there are tools for this.
Okay, so John, you've told me how to totally fuck up the secure boot system, right? Great.
Oh, yeah.
Now fix it.
Oh
Yeah.
man,
Therein lies.
I
the
thought you were
right
fun.
there.
Come on.
But this is my question. Something I'm like the recommendations aren't great right now. They lack a lot of details.
Well,
No, I
Tell
wasn't
my-
saying
the-
one
my
of the
peak- the
recommendations.
peak-
They
right.
always suck.
I know, right? Yeah,
Right.
you
The
perfect question
right,
because
I have a PK. I have a certificate in the PK variable on my system. The private key has been compromised, likely by attackers. if that's the top hierarchy of the root of trust? Now what? Everything has to get regenerated, no, or
So
re-signed.
there's something interesting here that I think comes back to, let's suppose that you were writing the UEFI spec. I mean,
Mhm.
I have friends who are doing this sort of stuff, and they're pretty cool, and they tried, like they really
Right.
did some good stuff. But you run into some really tough problems, and one of the tough problems is if I really lock this down, then I just broke a whole bunch of people who actually do customize their stuff, right?
Mhm.
Linux got real a lot of people in Linux community got real pissed when secure boot happened as a thing, because they're like, you're trying to lock us out of our own machines. I want to run Linux. I want to compile my own kernel. Hell if I'm going to let you do that. Fair point.
There's a website that every other week John just bashes secure boot. It's like some open source advocacy, and it comes up in my feeds because like I have
Are you
searches
sure
for
it's not our
UEFI.
blog?
No, it is not our blog. But like every other week, there's an article that just completely trashes secure boot for one reason or another. It's kind of poorly written, but
Oh,
it brings up, I
fair
mean,
enough.
somewhat valid points too,
Yeah.
as well. But like, I often don't cover it or evangelize it because I'm like, well, yeah, they have a point, but they're just,
What you're
open source.
saying is that John Loucaides is the tinfoil hat wearing guy for Secure Boot.
Maybe.
I don't, maybe. I mean,
So it's
we have an
funny,
I'm
interesting,
just
right?
it's an
saying.
interesting relationship with secure boot, right? Like on the one
Yeah.
hand, I don't know, John, how you feel, right? I feel it's important technology for us
Yeah.
to continue support. On the other hand, like it's had flaws and will continue to have flaws that we have to deal with. And like the third bucket is where we're going with the open source thing, is that as you decrease like freedom and increase controls, like then you can't do whatever you want on the system. And you guys know me. I'm like, I want to be able to do whatever I want on my computer. It's
It
my
also gets a
computer.
lot harder to fix anything too. So
Right.
if the more locked down you are, I actually wanted to point out, some of those actual design constraints that you end up running into if you are writing the spec. And and Josh, I think you're gonna enjoy some of these. If you were doing this all in true hardware, okay,
Mhm.
great. You can only boot one thing. It's in hardware. I hope you don't ever need to do anything else because you can't update it, right? Like real hardware.
It's fused in a chip.
It's
The
like
key
it's
is
done.
not changed. Done.
Not a key, just like this is the code, that's
Oh yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. I
Never
see. You could
update
just hard
anything.
code everything, right? Yeah.
You could do it.
I have a computer that will not update to Windows 11. I have because it's got the wrong
Yeah.
TPM. I've got to turn it into a Linux box in order to not just chunk
Mhm.
it because it's useless now.
So like you could do that, but nobody does because people make mistakes. There are bugs. You need to do updates. You need to have some way of making these things work. So then you start introducing things like signing, right, which lets you control who can do it, right? Okay, that's great. But then you run into the problem of who should be allowed, specifically who, right? Is it just you? Is it you and me? Is it like,
Mhm.
the larger the group of people that you need to support, the larger the group of people that, needs to sign stuff. So this becomes untenable when you get the entire computing ecosystem and you have a CA for like all of Windows machines, right? Like this is the secure boot ecosystem. That's what you're dealing with. So if it wasn't this problem, would it be 10 more? Absolutely. That said, your question about fixing it is pretty legitimate. And the way I would think about it, if I wanted to actually be productive and helpful, which is not always the case, but let's suppose, hypothetically,
Screw everybody, just burn it all down. Yeah.
hypothetically, I would actually try to work on this idea that you're trying to keep a secret, right? You have a private key, it's a secret. Um, let's
Oh, secrets, encryption. Anybody? Never mind. Go ahead.
well, right? Like it's like any other secret, was it a Jefferson quote about how many people you can tell a
Mhm.
secret to? And the idea being, if it's my organization, maybe custom mode is not a bad idea. If I care enough and I actually do have the people to support it, then actually changing it out and putting my key in there is not a bad idea. And then I don't have to worry about shim anymore. I don't have to worry about
You're maintaining your own root of trust. You're determining what you trust, what you don't trust in your own key hierarchy.
And you do this all the time with other stuff. If you wanted to outsource that, you could, right? You're still only trusting the one entity you had one job. Do they still mess it up? Absolutely.
HashiCorp, AWS KMS equivalent, something like that. You could do it. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not unreasonable. It's no fun, as Paul, he has tried. And it can be a pain, but it can be done.
So, John, I'll tell you that I have calls about PKI, about PKI installations and questions and stuff.
I'm sorry.
Probably once a week and sometimes twice a week. Okay, with companies that are sometimes incredibly large, and how do I say this politely? Most of them suck.
But hold on, to that point, Josh, like they might be trying to manage PKI for something seemingly less complex than what we're talking about in UEFI, right? Like we're talking about a key.
That's not a good thing, dude.
But
okay, you're not
that's
helping
why I usually
here.
don't advocate in rare case. But most of the time, I'm like, do not try and maintain your own ecosystem for secure boot, because not only do you have to maintain a key hierarchy, but you have to maintain signatures not just for your software, but for other people's
everything
software.
You might boot. Everything you might boot.
Right up to your kernel drivers that have to be signed as part of, not always, right? I think that's a tunable option.
By the way, driver signing that's a whole can of worms,
right? That's why we have drivers in Windows that are used maliciously that have not been revoked, because again, Microsoft doesn't want to break functionality for its user base.
Well, I was going to say, you guys have probably dealt with living off the land attacks, right? That's a very common thing these days. It's kind of the new hotness.
Yeah, it's the only hotness right now.
Like, the only hotness. There you go.
Right, yeah.
But like, what am I talking about here other than it's another kind of a living off the land attack? It's just with the bootloader instead of a driver. And in fact, the way you sign it, it's the same.
Yep.
So it's sort of back to what you were saying, Josh. How many really good PKI like implementations have you seen? And you've seen a lot, right? So like, that's what you have.
I've seen, to be very blunt, I've seen a lot of people try really hard to do it right. I've seen a lot of people try very smart things to do it right. However, the implementation of a good, solid PKI system from soup to nuts, from CA plus a self-sign for internal, plus this, plus that, plus the automation, with the lifespan shrinking, 13 months, they're going to 90 any day now, let's be honest. Okay. Now Entrust being kicked out. Nobody's using extended validation. Nobody's selling them, but there's some people that have contractual requirements to do EV certs with like all the different pieces of this. And I know that's not the same thing, but with all the different pieces of this kind of thing, it's not easy. It's not easy to get everything correct.
Keep doing
Perfect.
It right
Perfectly
time.
Correct. Which is why automation is on the upswing for all people. Everybody's now using AppViewX and Keyfactor and Venafi and various other companies. Okay, I'm not bitching at Venafi; they actually do great if you have a mainframe. But like automation is the name of the game right now. So that's great. That's wonderful. That's cool.
So I have one of these 850 model laptops or PCs that are affected by this. I can't just drop in a new PK, can I?
You probably could. We could probably talk about that later, and I bet you could do it. But it's not something that I would recommend for most people,
because it would have to be have signed one of the other PKs that signed the key exchange key.
You would have to
just work, right?
You'd have to update the whole thing.
You'd have to update the whole thing.
Yeah, you have to redo the whole
the whole
hierarchy.
I need a whole new hierarchy.
And you could do that.
Which
often you could.
Well, but a lot of times it comes down in your UEFI or BIOS update for your laptop. So big manufacturer. I don't want to name names and pick on people because we work with in this larger ecosystem, right? I don't want to pick on
It
anyone.
actually really opens your eyes to like be on both sides of this, because I,
Right,
I I
right.
did I did get to enjoy being on both sides. I did work for Intel, and I did deliver a lot of bad news,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of get how this happens. It's not like people are incompetent. It's that it's really that bad of a problem that getting everything right all the time is probably not going to happen.
Right,
So, what are you going to do about it when something's wrong? Is really
right.
kind of the question.
Can you go back to that, Paul? So you're saying, as an individual, like just a user, if I have an impacted device, I just can't download a firmware update and apply that to resolve this issue?
I that is a valid bet, right? That's possible. There's a valid path, right? The OEM could say, "Here's a new BIOS for your computer."
Hmm.
Inside of usually it's what we call a capsule update, right? So it's not the full BIOS, just like the update packages. In those update packages, it goes, "Hey, I'm going to give you a whole new
Right.
secure boot key hierarchy,
Mhm.
new revocation lists, new allow lists, and you're good." And just hope. The danger with that is if in that update they fail to include something in your boot process in the
Mm.
DB, or it's in the DB. In other words, if my bootloader is in the DBX in that update, my
Hmm.
system's not going to boot.
Wow.
Right. That
On
and
the
Wow.
plus
that's
side, they probably are more capable of testing that than you are.
correct. Right.
Hmm.
But they build firmware. If they mess up firmware, the thing don't work anymore. Right?
Hmm.
There's not much
Right.
no way around that.
I mean,
Um,
as a user, should I be expecting that that's what's going to occur? Right.
I would be leaning on my vendors or suppliers
Huh.
to make that occur if they are affected. But I would also point out that this is one of the better cases where that is possible.
Hmm.
There are cases where the root of trust in hardware has
Hmm.
been leaked,
Hmm.
and that is possibly
Yeah.
unfixable.
Sure.
That's when we get into like boot guard, right? Because boot
Yeah.
guard keys are not as pliable as secure boot, and that's the major difference.
And
Is
there might be
yeah.
some edge cases where you can do some things, but the problem is at some point you get to real hardware that actually doesn't change.
Mm.
And if you mess up over there, you're in real trouble.
Well, without naming and shaming, I mean, so like, is there, and I don't even know how to ask this question without doing the shaming part, but like, are there specific vendors that are, that, hey, 100% of their systems are impacted by this, or, or is it not that, so, and I don't know this question, so I'm not naming anybody here, but like, like HP, like, well, only some of our systems are impacted, or, every Windows device that, or just every laptop or whatever. Um, how does that kind of
Most of the
look?
major players don't have like we messed up everything, as far as I know.
Hmm.
Um, a few of them certainly have more than others, right?
Hmm.
But if you think about how this happens, it's sort of a set of unfortunate like accidents, if you will.
Sure.
And so you could imagine that it happens on a series
Yeah.
altogether.
Hmm.
But then, like some other series that wasn't doing things with the same group or didn't do things the same
For
way, it
sure.
has no effect,
For
right?
sure. Yeah.
So that's what kind of happens here. The um, the thing that I was using as an example of what it could be, what's even worse, was in some of these other leaks where they leaked bootguard keys, and you're dealing with an
Yeah. So John, that was my
actual.
question. Could you summarize the difference between Intel's boot guard and secure boot?
So Intel's bootguard is a lot like any other hardware root of trust secure boot mechanism. ARM has something similar.
Mm-hmm.
AMD has something similar. All the major players do some kind of you fuse some kind of a hash or a key or a something, and then you have some kind of a manifest that lets you do some swapping out of stuff, and then you verify the actual thing you're going to execute against whatever was fused, right? So
Right.
those are
So this
one-time
is
programmable things,
before secure boot kicks in. The
or you
earlier
even run
process,
software.
right? Yeah, the earlier process is where boot guard comes into play. Hmm.
Right, right. So bootguard's Intel's thing.
Mm-hmm.
ARM has their own, different ARM implementations have their own. Qualcomm has something. I know NVIDIA has something, but all of them kind of work in some variation of that approach.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are unlucky enough to have lost the private key associated with that thing that you fused, you are in some serious, like, there's not a lot of ways around that.
Right. Another way to explain that is we've talked about situations where manufacturing mode is still enabled, which
So
means
this is actually a different, interesting point. Yeah,
so like
manufacturing
they didn't
mode.
if they didn't close out manufacturing mode, it means they didn't fuse the keys, which means an attacker can fuse the keys and lock everyone out of
I'll
the
fuse
system.
something else, no
Yeah.
problem. So manufacturing mode actually is the name of this particular sort of issue when it's being applied to like BootGuard and the Intel ecosystem. But again, same sort of stuff. You got to have a way to test and debug your stuff. And we've never heard of weird, terrible JTAG things before, have we? So that sort of problem.
Who would think of that? God.
I thought weird and terrible is what JTAG stood for.
It is. I mean,
Just terrible.
just terrible.
Asshole.
Yes. Got you again. But I think, the manufacturing mode thing, it enables some testing. It enables somebody to actually build a machine.
Right.
And
It's similar
do
to the
stuff.
test keys that we're talking about in this context. Yeah.
So until you
Just terrible
There you
access guard.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Attribution when you write that in your next blog post. Okay, John?
Okay. Works for me. I think these these things like manufacturing mode, it's really easy to forget, right? You're a manufacturer, you're doing these things, or better yet, actually, I like what Josh, where you were going with the PKI stuff and automation. If you're a huge player, you can't do this stuff by hand. You're definitely automating all of it. And in fact, you don't get to touch the stuff that is going to do it. So like there is no easy way to screw this up without screwing it up everywhere. But when you go and customize things and you're a smaller player and you're going to take stuff that is unlocked and you're responsible to lock it, you got all sorts of opportunities to forget. And if you're not all sorts of paying attention or writing just as much automation as if you were a big player, you will probably forget something at some point. That goes badly too, because the worst thing about this is that everything works just fine. It's just completely insecure.
Is that such a big deal these days? Look, if you can't tell me the risk that we're going to get breached using it, I can't care about it.
And that's the challenge. And that's the challenge we have today, right?
Wait, hold on a second. Could this be, it just might be a privilege escalation bug here, right? Like, so we're going to have to patch it, Paul.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, Bill's on this thing where he's only going to patch local privilege escation.
That's right.
Not patching anything else.
Oh,
nothing else. Just that. Yeah.
Well, actually, this is a great LP.
Yep. Yeah.
This is a spectacular LP for you.
So another one I want to hit on quick
you-
was I had a note in there. There's an upcoming talk at Black Hat. You've already been hacked. What if there's a backdoor in your UEFI OROM? And what they're talking about is option ROMs. My question, I feel like we're on a game show. My question for you, John, is what's the difference between a Dixie driver and an option ROM?
I'll take option ROMs for 600.
It's a daily double.
This is daily double for sure.
So in many ways, the code is very, very similar, right? You're running at a similar time. You're sort of in this Dixie environment where you've got things that are you have a reasonable state of the system already, there to be used.
Right. Things have been initialized, but you're using Dixie drivers and option ROMs to further initialize things in the boot up sequence, right?
More things. Yeah. So what I'm talking about is like some real basic stuff, like you have memory.
Right.
right? Like you can use DRAM, real table stakes kind of things. But like now you're going to go and you're going to create some initialization related to some specific device. And so why do you put an option
Because I
ROM on the
want
device? Well, there's
Wi-Fi
something
in these early
special.
stages in case it needs internet access to get a CrowdStrike update so that my system actually boots. Is my recent scenario for this. Because there was people that were like, it didn't update because it was a Wi-Fi only, and the Wi-Fi didn't get initialized till later on in the sequence. And this is a good use case for an option ROM. I use an option ROM to enable my Wi-Fi.
So Paul has his Raspberry Pi access point with an option ROM, also providing RAID controller for all of his disks, which I'm sure is going to be a great idea. That is
There's
the
17 mismatched SANs and NASs and JBODs, stuffed in closets and underneath stairs and shit.
I could definitely picture Paul doing this. Actually, this would be hilarious. So you can set this code that will actually do the initialization. It can take control during the boot process and do all of that RAID stuff and actually make connections over that Wi-Fi stuff. And what's special about it is it knows about the special hardware that you're adding, right? So you have a PCI card, you have a something that's going to handle this area, and it's not built into the motherboard, so it's not part of the system BIOS. It's part of something else, and that's the option ROM or extension.
So I
ROM.
have an external Ethernet card plugged into my system. Typically, it's an option ROM that enables that.
You will probably see this on your servers because you probably do come with one of those. Like if it's a Dell, it's like a PERC whatever RAID controller. And you'll see those like push whatever.
But an option ROM has very privileged execution in the boot up process.
It's running before the OS,
Yes.
just like this.
So
all
like
the other
I've
stuff
seen,
we were talking
I've
about
seen
now.
like examples in like really esoteric spots and like research that are like, if you can execute code in an option ROM, boy, an attacker can just have a field day. And then when I saw it being presented at Black Hat, I'm like, this is a great opportunity to bring this into the daylight now, right?
Yeah, I'm going to enjoy whatever they present on this one. It's going to be kind of entertaining for people like me who have this warped sense of humor
and have played in this space before. I think this is really super interesting. When we talk about pre-OS execution option ROMs, I'm like, there's been some research and there's been some like shenanigans. I feel like people have used it
Mostly
to like bypass certain things or whatever. But I'm like, what happens if it's in the hands of an attacker? And I think this is where this talk is going.
So I'd give you maybe 2 quick points or ideas here. Number 1 is red teaming. I think we should open this door on red teaming of this kind of stuff.
Wait, bonus question though. Are option ROMs signed?
Actually, yeah, that was number 2. So so skipping to number 2, that this is all connected. The thing that we started talking about with PK fail here and that whole secure boot ecosystem, it applies to option ROMs.
Signed, right?
It's supposed to.
They're
apply
supposed
to
be signed.
ROMs
I feel like there were some instances where it wasn't signed.
There are some instances
or you could take
where
something that
things weren't done.
That was signed and modify it, but didn't actually check the signature, because we've seen that in secure boot as well, right? Like secure boot. I think you and I had this conversation once. I'm like, but like he's like, sometimes the check just isn't there. And I think we've disclosed vulnerabilities where we're like, yeah,
we've had. There's lots of ways for things to go wrong, and and it's actually highly entertaining. Back in 2013, Yuri was at Black Hat publishing something like 12 different ways of bypassing secure boot, and they were all stupid like implementation things. Like one of them was hilarious, but in any case, assuming everything was done right, which it's a lot better now than it was in 2013, shocking, but it's still a lot of problems. Even if everything's done right, you come right back to PK fail and all of these specific root CAs that are built into firmware, and if that's messed up, well.
But that's how fragile it is, and we're talking about all of PKI essentially, right? And it often does come down to someone lost a private key, someone forgot to actually write the code that checks the signature, right? Like they're kind of in a similar kind of bucket. Like it's human mistake, lost a key or forgot to write the code. It's like log it.
I put it on the GitHub, homie. Get it from there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's
It's
get
like
off
my,
GitHub.
it's like my
Sweet.
authentication bug. I introduced my own software where I removed the code that actually checked the password because I was locked out of the system, and then I accidentally committed that to production.
That's good.
And so, like anyone could have just logged in.
Yes.
It was. I mean, support tickets were way down. It was great.
On the plus side,
Whatever you metric will improve. This is not a good thing necessarily.
This is an inverse, relationship.
so much more where that came
That
from.
being said, you've given us a picture, a pretty wonderful, complete picture. Thank you, John, of an issue. Fuck you, John. And
It sounds more like it.
and have not given us an answer as to how to fix it entirely, except on an individual, oh my God, are you joking basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good luck in an enterprise environment. They can barely know how to update their software. Okay? We're only going to patch it if it's a local exec privilege escalation.
Luckily, this is.
I mean, this is not an easy task. But look, and I want to put this in perspective. If you buy a new Mac, they're all vulnerable in the silicon. Okay? If you buy an Intel-based computer, is it Spectre or Meltdown that's still there? Okay?
Some version of these
and the
things,
Intel management engine, Paul has been sitting here for the last...
And I just told you that if it wasn't this secure boot problem, I've got 10 more.
Well, I mean,
right?
Paul has literally been sitting here for the last year going, dude, I
Yes.
gotta tell you about secure boot. It's fucking amazingly
That
bad.
is so funny because that is so true.
I get excited.
Like,
That sounds about right. And it is.
and it's ugly.
Yeah, I was gonna.
So
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not. I think John, the way that you put it is that you could argue either side. It's not going to be a nightmare unless it's a nightmare, right? And then it's going to be a nightmare,
Right.
Yeah.
But
Pretty much.
I have a question,
And
it's a serious question. So you work for this company called Eclipsium. And, so there's other people that work there, mostly jackasses like Paul. I'm just kidding.
and me.
There's other people that work there. But anyway, the point is, what is Eclipsium? What is anybody doing about this shit? Is it just an informational aspect, or are there things that you're doing for enterprise companies and SMB companies that can actually fix this stuff? I'm honestly curious. How do we get past the, dude, this is awesomely bad, and get to the,
So
here's what
I
you
will
do?
I'll give you a theory, and you may or may not buy it. But my theory is, if you try to make this stuff go away, you're going to fail. You can try. Good luck. Lots of people have. But there is no silver bullet, to be way too trite. But if you actually make things that are visible, you stand a chance.
Okay.
Meaning,
so you're not here
if
for the
I
you're not
can
here for
make
the
it-
fixing. You're here for the visibility aspect of it. Put it, pull the covers back. Uncover the garbage. And
You
go,
should
it's
know.
garbage. You should know the garbage is here. Okay.
This is the garbage that you have.
This is why
Has
your
it
house
changed?
smells so freaking bad. Okay, people.
You want to do something about that? Maybe this is the one that's the worst.
Okay.
Right?
That's a valid answer.
This is the worst offender.
I'm actually comfortable with that's a valid answer.
But I think it's two things. I think
And this is
visibility is
my-
a huge point to it, and there's multiple layers to that. There's visibility of the vulnerabilities and exposures that exist, but there's also visibility into actual attacks. That if we're not looking for attacks in this space, then how do we know if it's being attacked or not, or used in some kind of attack chain, right? And the second thing is the remediation is something that all of us basically in technology really don't like to do. If you talk to anyone in technology and you're like, hey, your answer is to update firmware, they're like, oh, shit. Like, I hate that answer. But that's the answer here. And we all know, because we've all been burned by a firmware
I would
update.
rather roll out new computers than
Yeah,
update firmware.
right.
Let's be honest. Okay.
there are a lot of people who actually
Like the
take
answer
that
to the
option.
CrowdStrike thing was delete a file, right? Or get a new update. If the answer was update firmware, good Lord, we would be in a lot of trouble.
And it could
Right.
be. That's the sort of problem that we're talking about, where it's like it's probably nothing unless it's really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And back to sort of what you were talking about, Josh, I think a lot of this stuff is such a dumpster fire, largely because it can get away with being a dumpster fire. If everybody can see it and everybody
Right.
can smell it, you're not going to get away with some of this stuff. Now, you still get away with plenty of other things, but at least it would be a lot
Right.
better. And so that's kind of the approach that I've been trying to move toward as I ended up eventually working at Eclipsium. And it in a way, what Eclipsium is doing is making it so that you don't have to go read all the data sheets that I have had to read, and you can still handle this stuff at a level of, well, this is vulnerable and it's kind of a mess. That one's better. Okay, it's all a mess, but at least none of it has changed.
Oh, dude.
I was almost going to wait till off air to ask this question, but I want to ask it on air because it's been a burning question, and you and I haven't had a chance to catch up. So we're going to do it on the air. In the CrowdStrike incident, I was like, well, knowing what I know about Intel vPro and AMT or active management technology, I'm like, can administrators use that facility that Intel created to manage machines that were offline or manage it outside of the operating system? To all they had to do was go and delete a file. I understand BitLocker, like let's put BitLocker aside for a moment. Let's say BitLocker is in play. Couldn't I have used Intel's active management technology to go, I'm going to connect to that system, even though it's blue screened, right? Shouldn't I still be able to get in and delete that file? That's the way I understood it. But I don't know if you have any.
At a technical level, it's possible, but you put a lot of assumptions in place there. Number one being you
It's
actually
actually
use
configured.
AMT.
Right.
What?
Right. Yep. I've seen that. There's various states of either not
But
configured or in the process of configuration for AMT. Yeah.
I knew a guy that ran a data center, and he's like, yeah, we bought all new Dell servers, blah, blah, blah. They had a disaster. And they're like, all right. He said, all right, I'm going to use that thing called iDRAC or whatever it was, to IPMI to get
yeah.
in. Turns out I hadn't configured a goddamn one of them. And he had to fly 2,000 miles to physically go and start pushing buttons.
This is the real set of assumptions that really. So in theory, if you had actually managed this really well and you were actually on top of things, yeah, totally could. And if you really mean it about having an out of band, management network and all that, totally. But the problem really comes in where, the real world strikes again, and you didn't actually do any of those
now
things.
that I think about it, if it's a home user or a remote location, you'd need a hole in the firewall essentially, right, to get to that.
Well, and that's where you get into something like the airlines, right? Where, they probably are actually trying to follow a lot of really good security procedures. They probably aren't really accessible in a lot of different ways. They probably even, and this is the thing that I would be shocked, but yet not shocked. It would be very unfortunate if you were trying really hard to keep all your backups up to date. Then you got hit with this thing, and you got hit because you were doing such a good job of keeping everything up to date, even the backups.
We are ransomware proof. We have backups, offline backups, immutable backups. I have a copy of some tapes in my sock drawer. We got CrowdStrike hit. I'm fucked.
Yeah, but I worked really hard to get updates to all those backups. Like that didn't happen easily, and that that's like somebody's trying really hard to do something that's probably a good. Like it sounds like it should be good, and now you just made it bad.
Paul, I think we've got some questions.
What, you would do 5 questions? I think John did the 5 questions. He's done the 5 questions on the show before.
Oh, come on, do them again.
All right, we'll do them again. John, you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure, I forgot what
There
they
you
all
go.
were, but let's go for it.
3 words to describe yourself.
Oh my gosh.
Gosh,
I
that's fake.
am
Oh my gosh.
definitely a geek. Well, I guess that's 3 words, right?
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
The Intel Management Engine.
I was going for something like that. I think I was going to go down like spy programmer or something, but I actually like that. Something like out of band management or BMC. Oh yeah, I would definitely do. Yes, serial killer via BMC, definitely.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
First thing that comes to mind is mistakes were made.
For the paper, because I'm thinking like paper copies don't have firmware. This book, for the paper copies, this book has no firmware.
Ooh, that's good. I like it.
That one's the hardest question for me. Like that
like
one's
that.
such a tough one.
John, what is your favorite hacker movie?
Definitely The Matrix.
There you go.
Definitely The Matrix.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Oh, right.
Alive,
I don't
dead,
even
fictional, or
remember what I
otherwise.
ended up
Yeah,
with
this
on
one
this
he
one.
remembered. This one he's like, oh, I hate this question.
Yeah, this was the one I hated. I was like, I have no idea.
I think I see your dad hanging up there on the wall behind you. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that guy. That's for sure. Who else? What else do I got here?
Doesn't have to be, gender doesn't matter in this. It's 2024, man. 2 people.
Yeah. Who's the second one?
For understanding the forces beneath the surface, Sir Isaac Newton.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's a good
Go
one.
with Newton.
I was
I love
also
it.
thinking about, the Matrix, and I could go with like, Trinity or Neo or
You're
something.
not wearing enough leather. Sorry.
No, I'm really not. I don't really have.
You
the
should
body
see the
for it.
Photoshops we have on our internal Slack channel.
Oh my gosh!
No, you shouldn't. Really, no, you shouldn't.
And you never will. And you never will. But just saying.
Oh man.
Well, John, thanks for coming on Security Weekly tonight, talking about this topic. It was amazing as always.
Always a pleasure. I love you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, John. With that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the security news. Stay tuned.